everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. Thank you all so much for joining me for today. This is going to be a fun episode. I think it's going to be a pretty good episode. I have an audio question today from Issy. She sent in a question, I think last week, so we're getting this question up pretty quickly. So if you have a question that you would like answered on a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can check out all the past episodes there, but you can also send in your question by clicking on the Submit a Question link. You can also go over to Instagram and you can send me an audio question there. I am Fearcast Podcast at Instagram, so send me a DM and record your question there, which is exactly what Issy did to get her question out. So I'm going to jump into that today. We kind of talk a little bit about kind of how, like, what's the elevator pitch for ERP? How do you try to convey what ERP is very briefly? And then also we get into what do we do with groinal sensations? What do we do with the physical sensations? So that's all part of Issy's question. So without further ado, here is Issy's question.
Hello, my name is Issy, and I've been struggling with OCD for the past 7 years and have been recently diagnosed by a psychiatrist after some compulsive soul-searching period with a therapist that ended up with more anxiety and confusion. 7 years ago, my OCD started with POCD and SO-OCD obsessions, and somehow I overcame the POCD thoughts quite quickly because I guess I was able to convince myself that I would never do that. But the SO-OCD feels more real because it's possible for anyone to transition across the sexuality spectrum, and I guess that's where like the SO-OCD feels so real for me. And at the beginning, I thought that they were simple. Well, 7 years ago, I thought that they were simply anxiety attacks, and I was prescribed with antidepressants, and that pretty much helped me too. And 4 years ago, when I was about to start college, I started to have intrusive thoughts again, and the same thing happened. I went back to the same psychiatrist, and they just gave me antidepressants to control again the quote-unquote anxiety attacks. And now, as I have recently graduated and have no graduate plans, I started to have a peak in my obsessions. So I think that one of my triggers might be like uncertainty in my life. And this time I went to another psychiatrist who finally diagnosed me with OCD and recommended ERP. However, my parents are not particularly convinced with ERP. I think that they don't completely understand the method of it. And at the end of the day, they would be the ones paying for my therapy. So I don't know what to do. And I have been trying to do some exercises on my own about ERP, like saying, oh yeah, that girl's hot or whatever, and then watched, I don't know, like some shows with lesbian couples or romantic movies. And I think that the antidepressants and the exercise have helped significantly, but I'm still trying to get better, and I still ruminate a bit, and I still find some of the thoughts quite distressing. And I have listed a hierarchy of thoughts, images, and impulses that I have, but I don't know what to do about the physical sensations that I have. And I was wondering if you have any pointers I can use, and I don't know how I might start to self-regulate those.
All right, Issy. Thank you so much for sending that in. And there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm kind of going to break it up into two little bits. Let me pull up my notes here first. So first off, it's fantastic. I'm so glad that you got connected with a therapist. I'm so glad you got diagnosed. I'm so glad that you also got medication that was helpful. It sounds like you've kind of gone on and off periodically, but periodically throughout life, anxiety will wax and wane. So whether or not you're taking medication, whether or not you're on, or whether or not you're working with a psychiatrist, it doesn't even matter. The stressors of life can increase obsessions. It can trigger new obsessions. It can amplify obsessions that you currently have. It can bring back obsessions that have lain dormant for quite some time. Laid dormant? Anyways, for quite some time. And so we can kind of expect that. And life transitions can do that for some folks, not for everybody, but for some. But yeah, certainly changes of life, graduations, moving on, breakups, starting new jobs, ending jobs. Big life transitions can bring these things about because they can be stressful. They can also bring on a lot of questions about just, what are you doing in life and where are you going and what do you want and what's working for you and desires and all this stuff. So it inherently can ask you or have you ask questions about you and trying to get deeper. So, to no surprise, OCD might grab on to that. And that may be what's going on here. It may just be the luck of the draw, and for whatever reason, you got a spike, and here we are. But I'm so glad that you have more resources, more knowledge, more education that can help you kind of move down the road and use some of those tools that you previously had. So there are kind of 2 points here that you talked about. One, it sounded like it was like, how do you convince your parents that ERP is helpful? So a lot of people, well, first off, that's the one question. The second was, how do you deal with the physical sensations? It sounded like physical sensations specific to SO-OCD. So a lot of times when people say that, they're referring to groinal sensations. So sensations in, one's groin area. Sometimes it can be other physical sensations related to arousal, related to attraction, and all of that will kind of be wrapped up. So I'm going to kind of break it up into two little bits. So the first part, I want to talk about like the sales point for ERP. How do you convince someone that ERP is worth doing? And especially if your parents are concerned about paying for therapy and concerned about whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you, I wanted to offer some ideas and actually reached out to some people to kind of get their take and their idea on how to, I'm using the word sell ERP. It's trying to show someone that ERP is effective. Now, there are going to be people out there who don't think that ERP is going to be effective. I'm one of those people that do think it's effective. Now, it's not effective for everybody, so it doesn't mean that it's a magic cure to OCD and anxiety disorders, but it's something that has over time shown itself to be very effective for a great many people. There's a lot of research behind it, but there are other techniques out there that can also be helpful, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So one of the things that can be helpful first if you're trying to help someone understand what ERP is, send them some articles that you found helpful about ERP. And they don't have to necessarily be scholarly articles or articles that have a lot of research behind them and written in the awful research article or periodical kind of way. I hate them. Unreadable. Anyways, I find them to be confusing, but some people really do need that to wrap their head around it and feel like it is helpful. Now, if you found an article, though, or if you find a couple of articles or podcasts or YouTube videos that help explain what ERP is, send those to them. Talk with them about what about that video or that article really resonates with you. What about that article or podcast or video makes you feel optimistic and encouraged and hopeful about treatment? Sometimes that can be really helpful for someone to jump on board with the idea that maybe this thing could work. Now, the IOCDF has a ton of statistics and more scholarly articles, but also very readable, though that would be a good place to start. But the way I try to explain ERP to people who don't quite understand it is trying to make an analogy to something that is within their life or the life of the quote average person, and to try to get them on board in that way. To try to explain like, hey, I have existential OCD and I'm worried that I might be the only person in existence. So what I have to do is read a bunch of philosophy books and watch Looper or other time travel movies over and over and over again. People go, how is that therapy? How does that work? And I get it on its face when you're going like, hey, I'm concerned about, like, I have OCD, so I'm going to eat Skittles off the toilet seat. It doesn't necessarily sound like therapy. Now, for those of us who have been, working in this world or living in this world for quite a bit of time, you kind of see where the connection is, but perhaps to the average person, they don't see it. So the comparison that I usually do is I'll ask someone about public speaking. Now, you can do this with public speaking or snakes. Now, I know this is more the phobia side of things, but again, anxiety is anxiety, and we're going to treat it very, very similarly. So I kind of explain it as, I'll ask someone like, how do you feel about public speaking? Most of the time, people are going to say, I don't really love it. It makes me nervous. I get scared about doing it. And I go, well, why? Why would you be scared about that? And they go, well, gosh, what if I mess up? What if I, bumble or fumble? What if I say something awful? What if I make a mistake and they just think that I'm a big dummy? What if I misspeak and people all of a sudden don't think that I'm as smart or as professional or as knowledgeable as I should be in this field? Gosh, what if they just laugh at me and boo? What if they throw tomatoes? Like all this stuff. So what we're illustrating here is there is a situation that is neutral and that they have anxiety. They have this emotional response to it, and they have this kind of story going along with it. Now, all these are what ifs, right? Now, I'll say, all right, if I were to ask you to give a public speech to 100 people for just 10 minutes, but I want to give the same talk for a 10-minute talk for 30 days. On day 1, 2, and 3, it's not going to be very fun. But I'm willing to bet that by day 30, you're going to say two things. You know what? You're going to say it wasn't that bad, which reflects two things. It reflects one, saying it's not that bad reflects the emotional change. You don't have that person who gives this talk doesn't have the emotional response that they previously had to the same stimulus, meaning the same thing, public speaking. But two, it also changed the way that they thought about it. It changed their interpretation of it. They said it's not that bad, meaning the thoughts of they're going to laugh at me and yell at me and it's going to be terrible and I'm going to mess up. They don't take those as seriously. Perhaps they've learned that those outcomes don't happen. Now, of course, their imagination could say it could, but it's unlikely. They would have gone through that whole time and seen that it's really unlikely to happen. So I start sharing it in that sort of way. Now, I'm doing a lot more explaining in my explanation here. But a lot of folks can kind of see that when they think about practice, they can see that something gets easier when you practice it. The nerves that they have about something, simply feeling not used to something starts to get easier over time by practicing it, right? Sometimes simply by just saying, how you get in a new car and it feels really weird, but because you're trying to figure out where everything is, but then all of a sudden, after you've been driving that car for a week, it starts to become second nature. Well, you did exposure and response prevention, essentially. You exposed yourself to the situation, to public speaking or to driving a car. And you didn't engage in responses. So there was response prevention. You didn't avoid public speaking. You didn't stop driving that car because it was awkward. You stayed and you kept driving and you got used to it. And it became easier. It became more second nature, I suppose that's the way to say it. So those are ways that I like to explain it. And for a lot of folks, family members that I've talked to who have struggled with that, they have found that to be helpful. But I wanted to share some examples from some other folks who are also professionals in OCD and share what they had to say. So Britta List she's a clinical psychologist. She says she often says that it's a bit hard to just stop doing what OCD tells you to do, but we can start breaking its rules. You need to be if you need to count, let's mess up the counting. If it tells you horrible things, let's treat it like a bully and not give it the satisfaction. And she says, quote, so, okay, sure, OCD, I love blank. So I love, punching my pastor in the face. I love blasphemy. I love, getting really contaminated, right? And then she says, we can go even better. We can be more extreme than OCD, and we can make it funny if we can. If we're laughing at OCD, it's not that bad, and we're going to mess with OCD and we're going to break its rules and bully it back. Carrie Torres emphasizes, she says, it's not my entire pitch, but she says, I emphasize that you'll learn to become more comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think that's a great, very simple way of summarizing what ERP is all about. Michelle Massey gave two things to say. She said one, kind of her joking thing. She says, want to come and do hard things with me that you don't really want to do? It's like playing Double Dare. It'll eventually be fun. And then she goes on to say, she gives a more serious one. She says, my job is to get you to do things that you wouldn't want to do on your own. We are taught that if you see a bear in a forest, to run away as fast as you can. ERP is asking you to go hang out with the bear. I get that it's hard and that doesn't make any sense. So, again, I think a lot of these explanations kind of punctuate how difficult it is to really explain what ERP is all about. But some of these things, hopefully, Issy, this has been helpful to kind of give you an idea about ways that you can help pitch this to your parents to help get them on board. But let's just shift real quick. Actually, before I even get into that, I'm going to put this out to everybody out there. If you have a way that you either explain ERP to somebody else or that ERP was explained to you to help get you on board, message me those. I want to hear them. So go over to Instagram. I'm Fearcast Podcast over there. You can put it in the the comments of the show post. You can just send me a DM for that. You can send me a message over at Fearcast Podcast. Any way you get it to me. If you want, you can message and say, you can share this on a future podcast or share your name with it, or you can. I'll share your name or don't. Just let me know what you want me to do. But I would love to get all these different ways that you've heard or you explain to some folks. Anyways, let's move on. Now, I know ERP is not necessarily the only option out there. There are going to be ICBT treatments out there. There's going to be just acceptance and commitment therapy. All of those can be really helpful. But if ERP is a tough sell, perhaps talking about just acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the ways I tell people, here's what ACT is, just in a nutshell. It's two parts: acceptance, commitment. It's accepting that sometimes we have thoughts and feelings and sensations that we don't like, that we don't approve of, but whether or not we like them or approve of them, they're there. So our job is to practice accepting the reality that we're in, whether we like it or not. And then once we can accept and acknowledge, if accept is a sticking point, I say acknowledge. So if we can acknowledge the reality that we are in, good, bad, or otherwise, then we can decide what we're going to do based on our values. And this is where commitment comes in. We're going to say, what is most important to me? What is a way that I want to live? Who is the person that I want to be? And what does that ideal person do in the face of the reality that I'm in? If I have a scary thought, what is my most ideal self want to do? What is most in line with who I want to be, with the best version of me, with the most compassionate version of me? And I'm going to make intentional steps towards being that person, not the person that responds to or gives way entirely to fear, that lets fear run their life. And generally speaking, letting fear run their life is not a value that most people hold. Letting anxiety and feeling and temporary emotion dictate everything they do in life, it's usually not high on the list of things that people want to do. So we're trying to make intentional choices towards being the person that we ultimately want to be. So all of these can be helpful, but again, I think a conversation with your parents would be helpful. Okay, so the second part. So you talked about how do you deal with the physical sensations. I love that you were talking about how you're trying to do exposures, saying that girl's hot. Awesome. You're saying you're watching shows with lesbian couples. Awesome. This is Pride Month. This is a great month to get out there and support the LGBTQIA LMNOP community, whatever the acronym is now. Awesome. But go out and celebrate and encourage that community. Go to Pride parades, festivals, I don't know what they're called. Anyways, go. And the idea behind this is that you're going to go and guess what? You're probably going to see some gay and lesbian folks there, and that may trigger your anxiety. Good. And simply being there and talking to people and being around it and tolerating the thoughts, meaning allowing thoughts to be there, allowing physical sensations to be there, and saying this is all okay. I can have feelings, I can have thoughts, and I didn't ask for those thoughts and feelings, but I'm here and I want to be here. So I'm gonna be. So all of that can be helpful. Okay, but you also said what to do about the physical sensations. All right. So I talked at the very beginning about the physical sensations. So sometimes what this is referring to is the groinal sensations, are the groinal sensations. Now, there's a bunch of great articles out there, and I'm going to, let's see if I can find it. I had it up. I'm going to encourage everybody to go over to Made of Millions and read Kimberly Quinlan's fantastic article. It's very easy to read. It's a very quick article, and it's called What's Going On Down There? OCD and Arousal. So that's a great article to read. So what I'm going to say is going to be a condensed version of this, which is a condensed version of an article or a book from Emily Nagoski called Come As You Are. Now, there's a lot of other articles and books and resources that talk about this, but I think Nagoski's book, Come As You Are, is a fantastic book. And there's a chapter in there just on arousal non-concordance. And that's, I think, what we should be talking about here. So a lot of times with groinal sensations and groinal responses, there is arousal non-concordance going on. Now, what this is ultimately about is that, and Nagoski talks about this, and the article from Quinlan talks about this briefly, is that there are kind of two things. You can think about within kind of arousal and attraction, there are, and they simplify it to these two terms, accelerators and brakes. So sexual accelerators, so these are things that move us towards sexual arousal or move us towards kind of attraction, right? Or getting ready for sex. And there are other things, sexual brakes, that slow us down from that or stop us from experiencing arousal or moving towards sex or being prepared for sex. Now, sometimes we're going to experience ideally, well, let's say this. Ideally, our physical and our mental and emotional would all be in sync, and either we are moving towards and being ready for arousal, or we are not. And that would make the most sense, wouldn't it? But alas, you and I are human, and we don't make any damned sense. So we have to deal with the ridiculousness of ourselves. So here's what she kind of talks about. So arousal non-concordance then is saying that our body, our emotions, or our brain, or our psyche, or our thoughts, whatever it is, they are not in agreement. So some parts perhaps are experiencing sexual accelerators and want to move toward sex. And there are some parts of us that are experiencing sexual brakes that are trying to slow that process down and just simply aren't there. Now, for dudes, the simplest example I give are two, actually. One is having what's called morning wood. If you've ever heard about this, it's waking up and having an erection. Now, extremely common, but just because one's body is prepared for sex doesn't mean that one's emotions or thoughts or desires are ready for sex. Now, the other one for men as well is the dreaded NRB, the no reason boner. It's the kissing cousin of the morning wood. It's just the erection that just kind of happens. You didn't ask for it. You didn't seek it out. You didn't want it to be there. You're in a class. You're in a meeting. You're just driving to work. And all of a sudden things happen. And you're going, come on. Now I can't stand up in this meeting. Why is it? It's awkward is what I'm trying to tell you. Anyways, that was too much. Okay. What we're talking, but let's go the other side of it, right? Sometimes people are mentally and emotionally interested, wanting to have sex, wanting to go there, but their body's just not cooperating, right? So all of this we'd be considering arousal non-concordance. Now, they say generally speaking, Women experience more non-concordance than men do. However, of course, as my several examples, men also experience it. But generally speaking, women, according to all these articles and books and whatnot, they will say that women will notice more non-concordance. So more either their body's not into it, but their mind is, or their body is into it, but they're not emotionally there yet. So there are a lot of things that can happen to us emotionally and physically. Now, so what do we do about this? Well, one of the most important things that we can do about this is to acknowledge in this moment what our body is doing. Our body in this moment is experiencing something. It might be physical arousal, it might be something in our groin. It might be something emotionally. It might be we're feeling butterflies in our stomach, or we're feeling something in our chest, or we're feeling, flushed, right? And those can all be signs of arousal. Those might be part of those accelerators towards sex. But then other parts of us might not be interested. We might feel anxious. We might feel nervous. We might feel angry, tired. We might feel just blah or neutral, maybe distracted by work or some other distraction. And unfortunately, our body doesn't really care. Now, sometimes our body can react to a thought or to a stimulus that, even though we didn't ask for it, can produce arousal. So it's kind of like if there's talk about sex, sometimes we can start to feel aroused one way or another, right? Because there's a sexually relevant information, sexually relevant stimulus going on that we're privy to. And part of our brain might grab onto that and treat that as an accelerator and say, well, let's go. But then the other part of you might not. It's confusing, right? Right. And that's all okay. So what can then happen is OCD can grab onto that and try to, and I'll say naturally and understandably speaking, say, what the hell is this all about? Why do you experience this? What does this mean? Now, this is a question that you could answer, but for those with OCD, this can be that rabbit hole that's just never going to be fully answered, right? Because are you aroused? Well, that's kind of a leading question. The answer might be yes, but the answer is also no. And we all know that OCD doesn't really care about that kind of answer, right? So the answer is yes and no. So what do we do with that? We say, I feel what I feel. My body is doing a thing right now. I'm noticing a physical sensation. There's something going on in my chest, in my stomach, in my groin, in my head, in my arms, in my feet. Okay, period. And accepting then the uncertainty as to what it means. We don't need to know what it means. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole to get the full answer of it. Instead, we just simply practice acknowledging our experience in this moment. I'm feeling this. Now this, whatever the this is going to pass. Everything is going to pass. Every emotional, physical sensation is eventually going to pass. So our job is in that moment, say, yep, I'm feeling aroused. I'm feeling a groinal sensation. I'm feeling as you said, physical sensation. And I'm just going to notice where it is in my body, accept it, acknowledge it, thank my body for it, maybe thank my brain for it. Say, hey, I'm really glad that this still happens. I'm really glad that this still works. I'm really glad that this is a function that my body and my brain can do. Okay. And then your brain might say, but what does it mean? What does it say about your sexuality? What's going to happen? Don't you need to figure this out? In those moments, we don't need to. In those moments, we can simply practice the uncertainty component. Say, you know what? I don't know. And then we move on. We let ourselves move on by not trying to go down the rabbit hole, by shifting our focus towards our life. Shifting our focus back to the class that we're in, towards the meeting that we're in, towards our drive to work, towards our emails, or towards gardening, whatever it is that you're doing. We shift it back to that, and we let that sensation dissipate all on its own and be interested in finding out what's the next thing that we're going to experience. Now, this is also something easy that you'll probably experience as you move up your hierarchy, right? As you move up your hierarchy, there might be things related to being gay, being a lesbian, that trigger you that are going to be sexually relevant information. And guess what? Your brain loves sexually relevant information. It goes, they're talking about sex. I'm seeing sex. They love sex. I love sex. Sex. But it doesn't mean that it has to mean everything for you. Period. So we acknowledge that our body is reacting a certain way. Not all of our systems are a go. Okay, well, I'm going to keep moving on with this because there's nothing I need to do about this right now. So, Issy, do yourself a favor and go check out that article. Go check out the Emily Nagoski book, Come As You Are, and practice acceptance of all the physical sensations that you experience. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to say, no, this is non-concordance. This is not mean what I think it means. Because oftentimes that can be, if you say it over and over and over and over and over again, that can be compulsive, perhaps. And simply giving yourself the permission with this information to then not seek out the answer, to have the sensation without trying to seek out a further explanation of it. That's how you take it to the next step. So, all right, Issy, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much for trusting me with this question. And again, go check out those resources. And until then, best of luck in your process. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.